I'd like to welcome everyone to our press conference today. First, I'd like to recognize that we're on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Squamish First Nations. Chief Jen Thomas messaged me this morning. She's unable to make it. There's been, of course, what happens in our communities, and the chief need to address a situation that's arisen. So today we call on the Prime Minister of this country, Justin Trudeau, to ensure that his direction to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for a transition plan from open net pen fish farms be accomplished to safeguard wild salmon, which are dwindling across the province, and of course, very poor runs that we've experienced in the Fraser River. Today is, in my opinion, quite a historic day. We have First Nation leadership here, commercial fishing representative, sport fishing representatives. We have the Pacific Salmon Foundations. We have the University of British Columbia. We have NGOs. We have wilderness tourism operators. We stand here today as representatives of virtually all British Columbians. The men and women that you see joining me here today rely upon healthy and abundant wild salmon stocks, not just in coastal British Columbia, but throughout all of the watersheds. And so we urge the Prime Minister to ensure that the mandate that he has given two successive DFO ministers to transition from open net pen fish farms be accomplished. So we have a number of speakers here today. We're going to be calling up in order of First Nations. We're going to have our legal counsel, Sean, speak. We'll have industry and NGOs as well. But we have to realize that the Fraser River is on the verge of extinction on many runs. We've had two successive historic low returns, and then we had the Big Bar landslide, which stopped virtually all salmon from making it to the spawning grounds. The time for bold leadership is now, or we are going to lose the genetic diversity of the Fraser River. But first, I want to bring forward our First Nation leadership to come and share their support for the transitioning of open net pen fish farms from the ocean. In no particular order. Hereditary Chief Homiskinis, Don Svanvik, Numgis First Nation.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam for allowing us to be in their territory to deal with this critically important issue. As has been stated already, and it's worth reiterating, the Prime Minister of Canada mandated that the open net pen farms be moved out of the ocean. So together, we're all standing up for wild salmon, we're speaking for wild salmon. Bob talks about the lowest predicted run in the history of the Fraser. That's a scary thing, and it's even scarier is it's not the smallest run that the Frasers had. A couple of years ago, there was only 290,000 sockeye that came back to the Fraser. And I've been a commercial fisherman, and that would be unheard of in my lifetime. We would never think that. Our river, the Nimkish River, was once the third or fourth largest sockeye producing river in the coast. We're fortunate if we get 40,000 back to it. It once sustained our whole nation and sustained many of our neighbors because we had protocols for sharing. One of the resilience of salmon, and they've demonstrated this over and over again. If we stop putting up barriers for them, they will survive, they will come back. And this is what we all need to do. We all need to participate in this. We need to remind the Prime Minister, we all need to do that this was his mandate. And the people in DFO need to follow that mandate. There hasn't been any work really even started to that mandate at this point. There's kind of this 11th hour, just before midnight stuff kind of running around, and these ideas that we can do some new science. And that all the science has been done. I come from the Badi Nations, the Mamalilkla, the Numgis, and the Kwikwasut and the Kakwapmis, who have done lots of science on this. We're First Nations who have an Aboriginal right to fish, has been supported in court several times. But the main thing is the benefit of wild salmon. We cannot lose that. Not only the nourishment to our bodies, the nourishment to the land, nourishment to the animals, trees, the ecosystems, we all depend on it. Not having wild salmon is not an option. So thank you all for your support, and let's remind the Prime Minister strongly that he's got to have his people follow his mandate. Gaila Kessler.
Cookby Justin Kane, Statlium Chiefs Council.
Good morning. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Justin Kane. I'm the elected chief in Squila First Nation. I'm also the chair of the Statlium Chiefs Council, who represents 11 communities in the interior of so-called BC, and many of our communities live along the Fraser River who depend on the wild salmon. Today we call upon the Prime Minister to follow up on his commitment regarding the transition of open pen fish farming out of the BC coast. Wild salmon is a staple food source amongst many First Nation communities along the Fraser River. Today, with the cost of foods and nutrients and the issues of access to a good, healthy diet, food security, food sovereignty couldn't be more needed. With the decline of wild salmon stocks from years of mismanagement and protection of the migratory waters from human-caused environmental impacts, natural disasters, warm waters, drought, extreme heat, and now past many years of having open pen fish farms on the wild salmon migratory routes, our salmon has become at risk. Today I plead not only with the government, but also the communities who are participating in the open pen fish farms to look to understand the concerns of the nations and the communities that rely on the wild salmon, such as ours, on the constant decline of wild salmon for our people. Wild salmon has been a staple in our communities for generations. Today, I also express concern regarding the industry that has been for years making a profit off an unnatural food source in our area that has been causing a negative impact on natural food source that our people rely on. In the Statlium, we have over 5,000 of our members, and every year we look forward to our fishing time, and every year we continuously fight with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, who says the stocks are low, and they try not to open our fishing, which is our Aboriginal right, as the hereditary chief has stated. And we continuously fight with DFO, and now we're continuously fighting not only with DFO, but with the governments in regards to the concern of the wild salmon and the open pen fish farms. We need the transition plan in place and hopefully not renew these licenses. Cook's Jam.
That was a very important, probably the Prime Minister phoning Pacific Salmon Foundation. I talked to him this morning. I'd like to introduce Chief Darren Blaney, Humalco First Nation.
Imot Gonanape, Imot Kotaste Gidgestams, Judges. Good to see you all. Good to be in the home of our relatives from these nations here. I'm Darren Blaney, Chief of Humalco. Homalku is our name. It means people of the rapids within and around Discovery Island. That's where our people get our name from. The issue that we have is that we are losing our salmon. When we lose our salmon, we lose our culture, we lose our teachings. All goes back to what the residential schools were trying to do to our people. Same thing. I think the The difficulty that the industry has is they have no social license, and also now they have no integrity. When we were consulting on the Discovery Islands, they withheld information on Tenacibaculum, even though we were consulting in 2020. They withheld the information because of how damaging it was to the industry. But DFO went to the industry and told them about the impacts that the Tenacibaculum was having on wild salmon. But they never brought it to our table because they said, we didn't ask. I think there's a constitutional obligation. We have a right. We have a right to salmon. And it feels really hard to understand how, we have a constitutional right and somebody doesn't abide by that and there's no consequences. And with this issue of integrity that DFO has, lack of integrity, we've been spending money trying to protect or support the minister's decision to remove the farms. Hamalco has spent about $700,000. And I've told the minister that we've spent $700,000 from our community to support your decision to remove the farms. And yet, we keep going back into this place of lacking integrity. So I think we keep pushing them towards integrity. The muzzling of scientists is shouldn't be happening, especially with a department that is there to protect wild salmon. And it's at the cost of our culture. We don't get to teach our kids our culture anymore around salmon because it's so decimated. So I think that the work that has to be done, I look at our neighbors, they talk about farmed salmon and saying they can apply indigenous knowledge. To me, I think indigenous knowledge takes about thousands and thousands of years, and somebody can say we have indigenous knowledge around farmed salmon with 30 years. That's a joke. Indigenous science, I think it's just industry. And it feels like these nations are puppets of the industry. And it's really hard to watch them. And I know they're not all impoverished. They're not impoverished. Some of them might be remote, isolated, but they're not all impoverished. If there's 8 nations that support it, you got 160 that say no. You can't be infringing the rights of First Nations along the coast and up the Fraser. Not only the rights, you have all the cultures that you're impacting. And I wear my Bear Tours jacket because Hamalco also does the Bear Tours. And we are looking for ways to look after our environment. We are looking for ways to be stewards of our environment. We're not all about making money. And that's what those 8 nations are doing, sacrificing their culture for the dollar. Thank you. I hope we all get them out of here.
Thank you, Chief Blaney. Introducing President of the Stalo Tribal Council, Tyrone McNeil.
Lausimasia, Kachiaislactals, Stalo Tosa. Hi chap, Skom, CM, Sila, Ekusi, Haha, Tamak Loyal. As Bob mentioned, Tyrone McNeil, President Tribal Chief, Stalo Tribal Council, representing 8 Stalo villages here in the Fraser Valley. And I can't help but consider the significance of us standing together here today, and I'm not sure if those of you standing here or those of you who might be reviewing this later appreciate the significance of First Nations standing with recreational fishers and standing with commercial fishers hand in hand, arm in arm. I fished the Fraser for nearly 60 years now, and for the majority of that, we fought with the recreational fishers, we fought with the commercial fisheries over salmon, wild salmon. And I hope my comrades here from the recreational fishery and the commercial fishery take this the right way, when I'd love to be in a position where we're fighting over salmon again. Because right now, none of us are getting what we need. We don't have enough to fight over. And I can't help but wonder here, May in 2024, standing here, I agree with Bob, we're a good representation of British Columbians. I know all British Columbians value wild salmon. A small handful of First Nations support the open net pen feedlots, but they tell us they don't consume those salmon because they're not healthy to eat. Standing here arm in arm with our colleagues, signaling to the Prime Minister and Department of Fisheries and Oceans that asking them, what legacy are you going to leave for all of us standing here today and for British Columbians and future generations? Is it going to be a legacy that you stand strong against foreign corporations, foreign interests? Or is it going to be a legacy where you kowtow to them, that you allow those foreign interests to continue damaging and harming wild salmon, the habitat, continue driving our salmon stocks towards extirpation and extinction? Those foreign interests don't have anything to lose, but they've got everything to gain. We as First Nations and British Columbians have everything to lose. We all rely on these salmon so much. So we stand here on one hand demanding, on the other hand begging and imploring those decision makers in Ottawa right now to make the right decision. Stand up for British Columbians, stand up for wild salmon. Do not kowtow to those foreign interests. Let's work together to rebuild salmon stocks. I feel they can be rebuilt provided those open net pen feedlots are removed. That's the biggest impediment in their way. We've seen higher numbers return last year because that's the first sockeye that never faced open net pen feedlots on the way out migration and in migration. A lot more returned than anybody expected because of that. And this year I feel the early predictions are at least double what they're going to be because of Big Bar, there's only 5-year-old salmon returning. And there typically isn't 500,000, it's more in 200,000 or less. So now is one of the most critical times in British Columbia's history with regards to our relationship to the Department of Fisheries Oceans and the Prime Minister. We're expecting both of them to make the right decision to benefit wild salmon, to benefit British Columbians, to maintain that harmony of relationship between salmon and the entire ecosystem, the values of the forest, the bears, the wolves have in support and appreciation of salmon is very similar to us as First Nations, and others want access too. So to the Prime Minister and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, work with us. We'll gladly work hand in hand with you, but if push comes to shove, we'll continue fighting you too. This is too valuable, this is too important a time to support foreign interests over our rights, over our interests, over the benefits for British Columbians. Hi, Chapka. Thank you.
So what we've heard, the majority of First Nations in British Columbia support actively Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's mandate to remove fish farms, to transition from open net pen fish farms. We had the North Island, the Numgis Nation, speak about their independent science they did within their agreement. We have Cook B. Kane from the Statlium Chiefs Council and the people there of over 5,000 beseeching the Prime Minister to remove the farms and attain food security. We have Chief Darren Blaney from the Humalco speaking about DFO's hiding of science within a consultation process. And we have Tyrone speaking about the extirpation, the hollowing of an Aboriginal right. And what I think is really critical for today is the broad unity that's represented here. The opportunity for the Prime Minister to attain province-wide reconciliation that benefits the environment and all British Columbians and the economy. I want to welcome Sean Jones to the speaker next, please.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Jones. I speak to you today on behalf of Wild First. Thank you for joining us here this morning on the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. People that have, since time immemorial, sustain their way of life, sustain themselves and their children on the abundance of wild Pacific salmon. Today, wild Pacific salmon are on the brink of extinction. So today, I have one question for one man. Prime Minister Trudeau, will you keep your promise? In 2019, you promised and mandated your minister to remove open net pen feedlots from coastal British Columbia. It was a promise that was based on common sense. We know that industrial scale agriculture spreads disease. Swine flu, bird flu, mad cow disease. We don't put pens with millions of cattle on the routes of endangered caribou. We don't put poultry farms in avian sanctuaries. We should absolutely not have pens of millions of Atlantic salmon on the migratory routes of endangered Pacific salmon. This is common sense. But common sense has been captured by DFO, who is in turn captured by an industry that peddles doubt in the face of scientific certainty, that peddles doubt the way that big oil and big tobacco peddles doubt. They peddle doubt so they can depend on predatory delay, delaying the inevitable and necessary changes for environmental protection so that they can continue to profit from the ecological harm they cause. The open net pen industry is based on an outdated 1970s idea that you can put fish in open net pens without any biosecurity to protect industrial scale agriculture and the diseases they cause, to have no protection is necessary to the wild habitat that they inhabit. We know that that idea is outdated and no longer true. So do they. So they plead for more time to implement greenwashing designed to protect the industry rather than protect wild Pacific salmon. So, Mr. Trudeau, will you tell the industry that it's out of time? Or will you fall victim to DFO, as two of your previous ministers have? We understand what you're up against. In 2012, Mr. Justice Cohen said that DFO should not have the mandate to both promote and police this industry. In 2015, Mr. Justice Rainey of the Federal Court found that DFO had unlawfully subdelegated authority to the industry to stock their farms, had ignored the precautionary principle. In 2018, both the Auditor General's Office and the Chief Scientist for Canada found that the DFO could not evaluate science objectively. 2019, Madam Justice Strickland of the Federal Court found that DFO had ignored the mandate to protect and conserve fish, had ignored the precautionary principle, had failed to consult the Numgis First Nation, and in a mind-boggling finding, had failed to consider the health of wild fish. In 2023, the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans asked for 13 different audits, inquiries, and investigation into the way that this industry is regulated, including an investigation into the influence that DFO managers have over scientists and if that influence is ethical. In 2024, just last week, the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner confirmed that she will be investigating whether DFO officials have acted with integrity, if they have indeed tried to prevent scientists from revealing their findings to the public, to the media, and Parliament. So, Mr. Trudeau, will you be ending this litany of misfeasance from DFO, or will we be adding your name to it? We're waiting for an answer, Mr. Trudeau. What is stronger? A filthy foreign industry that peddles doubt in the face of scientific certainty and peddles delay in the need of urgent action? We're waiting for an answer. What's stronger, Mr. Trudeau, your word or a cabal of DFO mandarins whose lack of integrity is an open secret and subject to a live investigation? We're waiting for an answer. It's May 2024. 2025 is 7 months away. We're waiting to find out. The majority of British Columbians are out of patience with an industry that pollutes for free. Over 120 First Nations are out of patience with DFO's lies, fake science, and cover-ups. We're all out of patience, Mr. Trudeau, because wild Pacific salmon are out of time. So I think I speak for everyone standing behind me here, Mr. Trudeau, when I deliver one message. Keep your promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'd like to introduce Mr. Kyle Lewis, he's Vice President, United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union.
Thank you, Bob. I'd also like to thank the previous speakers before me. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people whose territory we are meeting on today. My name is Kyle Lewis. I'm the Vice President of the United Fishermen's and Allied Workers Union. We represent over 2,000 active harvesters and plant workers here in BC engaged directly in the wild salmon industry. I stand here before you today in solidarity with all the others that you see here. What we have in common, all our livelihoods directly rely on a healthy wild salmon. We are on the brink of seeing the extinction of that here in BC, should a long-term fish farm license extension be issued. We stand to lose an entire culture as well as a way of life that helped build the very province we live in, should we see the collapse of our fish stocks here due to the current state of affairs. We were given a promise from our Prime Minister that we would see the transition of fish farms from open net pens by 2025. We have over 2,000 jobs in our sector alone that have been lost already due to this issue. I want my children, as well as all future generations in BC, to be able to engage in a healthy and vibrant wild salmon industry. We aren't just talking about jobs, we're also talking about First Nations food fisheries. The only way to ensure that is if the Prime Minister follows through with his promise. So, Mr. Trudeau, the 11th hour has passed. We urge you to do the right thing and give our BC salmon a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle, reminding us that coastal British Columbia includes commercial fishermen, that it is the backbone of British Columbia and has been for generations. I'd like to call forward representatives from the Pacific Salmon Foundation, beginning with President Mike Minier.
Thank you, Chief Bob, and thank you for also acknowledging the land we're gathered on here today. I too want to acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for letting us be here today. I'm Mike Minier. I'm President and CEO of the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And I'm with my colleague here, Dr. Andrew Bateman and Dr. Gideon Mordecai, who are going to talk a bit more about the important science work that we've been doing independently for the last 10 years. Our sole mission at the Pacific Salmon Foundation is to work with folks like those standing here today and all British Columbians to ensure that our wild Pacific salmon have a strong and sustainable future. That's our sole mission. And we've been doing that now for 40 years here in British Columbia as a nonprofit organization. And we have engaged tens of thousands of people all across British Columbia, Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people who are out fixing streams, running hatcheries, doing education programs with our youth, all around sustaining wild Pacific salmon. And I want to share just a personal story about why this is important. I grew up in the United States, and in the 1970s and 80s, our national environmental objective was to save the bald eagle, the American bald eagle, which was dwindling and seriously heading towards extinction. As a result of people coming together through conservation, as a result of governments protecting habitat, and that is what we are talking about today, is protecting the habitat of our wild Pacific salmon, and as a result of government taking strong action on chemicals like DDT that were harming these animals, we turned the corner for the bald eagle in the United States, and now it is a conservation success story. We can do that for wild Pacific salmon. As our chiefs have said here today, they are resilient. They've been thriving, surviving, and adapting for millions of years. This is something that we can do something about, open net pens. They are a source of pathogens and disease. Our science has shown this. Independent science has shown this over the last 10 years. And it's why we took the position in 2018 that open net pens were not a sustainable form of aquaculture for wild salmon. And it's why in 2019 we were delighted and publicly praised, and have praised since then, the government and the Prime Minister's decision to move from open net pen to closed containment. This is one of the things that we can do something about for wild Pacific salmon, and they will turn around, and they will thrive, and they will survive, and indeed many of our populations are surviving and doing well. It is not a hopeless case. But it is important for us and for me on behalf of the Pacific Salmon Foundation to speak directly to the Prime Minister, as well as Sean did so eloquently, and say to the Prime Minister and to our government, you have made a commitment, and British Columbians are expecting you to follow through on that commitment. And I will close by saying that the Pacific Salmon Foundation knows that we are standing on solid ground. We regularly do public polling of British Columbians to ask them how they feel about wild Pacific salmon. 86% of British Columbians rank wild Pacific salmon and their status as their #1 environmental priority. This ranks above single-use plastics, microplastics. It ranks above climate change in general. British Columbians care very deeply about this. It is in our lifeblood, and it is part of who we are as British Columbians, and I'm certainly proud to be a British Columbian, a Canadian, as well as a dual citizen who saw that turnaround for the bald eagle and stands here confident that if we come together and if the Prime Minister and the government follows through on their commitment, we will have strong, healthy, wild, abundant salmon for many, many generations to come. I want to now introduce Dr. Andrew Bateman, who's the director of our Salmon Health Program at Pacific Salmon Foundation, as well as then Dr. Gideon Mordecai, who has worked with Dr. Bateman. These are the two individuals that have led the science, working with the Broughton Nations and others on the science that led us to the conclusion that this is just an unnecessary risk for our wild Pacific salmon. So Dr. Bateman and Dr. Mordecai.
My name is Dr. Andrew Bateman. I'm a research scientist with Pacific Salmon Foundation, and I lead the PSF Salmon Health Program. PSF has been collaborating for over a decade now with researchers from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, DFO, and from leading universities around the province and across Canada. When we look back at that decade and when we look back even further, when we boil it down, dozens of peer-reviewed scientific publications make abundantly clear that open net salmon farms pose a risk through the parasites and pathogens they amplify to wild Pacific salmon, to the health and survival of wild Pacific salmon. We've been hearing a lot over the last several years about the minimal risk that open net salmon farms pose. Well, as a participant in DFO's science processes that led to that assessment of minimal risk, I can clearly say that DFO aquaculture and salmon farm industry influences undermine the integrity of those processes. Furthermore, those processes miss the mark. The Department of Fisheries has never once assessed the cumulative risk that open net salmon farms pose to all 5 species of Pacific salmon. In PSF's view, DFO's mandate to act in a precautionary manner requires the minister to protect wild salmon. Well, there are many risk factors that we can do nothing about. Key amongst them, climate change. Eliminating the parasites and pathogens amplified on open net salmon farms and the risk they pose to wild salmon is something that we can do something about. We do not have time to waver on this decision.
Thanks, Andrew. My name's Gideon Mordecai. I'm a research associate at UBC. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the scientific process and evidence. I'm part of a team of academic, government, and NGO scientists who have published many peer-reviewed papers detailing the disease risks salmon farms pose to wild salmon. However, these results are often not included in the official DFO science advice, and there's a worrying pattern of DFO not following scientific process. Data implicating the industry gets pushed aside. The key documents used by DFO to assess the status of pathogens are not made public. Draft versions we have seen ignore the peer-reviewed evidence. When DFO say that a bacterial pathogen isn't a risk to wild fish, or that a viral pathogen, which is originally from Norway, is not a disease, in spite of the clear published evidence, which finds the opposite, they're failing to meet the expected scientific standard. In January last year, DFO released a science response report, which concluded the opposite of most published science. Their report found that the presence of sea lice on wild salmon is not significantly associated with lice from nearby farms. Independent scientists pointed out technical flaws in their report, and when DFO failed to share the data they used to come to their conclusions, they're not meeting the open data requirements of modern science. We recently published a peer-reviewed perspective detailing how the scientific review process at DFO fails to meet international standards. This included a detailed review of how the CSAS process, which Andrew mentioned, is tightly controlled by DFO managers, and it can fail to be impartial and evidence-based. These are not isolated events, they're structural and locked into the interdependent way in which the department approaches science advice and policy. I speak to you today to try and ensure that the science detailing the risk is heard. Time and time again, independent peer-reviewed studies implicate fish farms as posing a risk, yet this key evidence isn't communicated to the decision makers. This omission undermines trust in DFO and most importantly, endangers the health of wild salmon populations. Thank you.
Within the current transition planning process, Homalco First Nation, the First Nation Wild Salmon Alliance, Pacific Salmon Foundation, University of British Columbia have all requested science data from DFO. It's been over 16 months. They still have not provided this. I'd like to call forward Karen Riston from Living Oceans, please.
Thanks, Bob. My name is Karen Riston. I'm the Executive Director at Living Oceans Society. For more than 30 years now, I've been involved in researching and documenting the problems with salmon farms. I've been reaching out to policymakers, educating, I think I'm up to 12 ministers, and the general public concerning the problems. And yet, as I stand here today, I can't say that I know that Ottawa understands the white-hot anger that is simmering on this coast. Excuse me. The thought that the Prime Minister might not keep his promise and saddle us with salmon farms for another 30 years is stoking that anger. We know that there is no technological fix for this. There's no middle ground that will protect wild salmon. All of the technology that salmon farmers talk about investing in all relies on open net pens to grow the fish to market size. So there's no Band-Aid that can be put on this. There's no quick solution. There's only removing the farms from the water. That's what you promised, Mr. Prime Minister. Keep your promise. Thank you.
Stan Probosh, Watershed Watch.
Hi, folks. Thanks for coming, and yes, thanks to Wild First and Bob for organizing. My name is Stan Probosh. I'm the Science and Policy Analyst for Watershed Watch. And our society has been advocating for the removal of open net salmon farms for 25 years. And that advocacy is based in a large body of science. And that's independent science that indicates open net salmon farms simply amplify parasites, viruses, and bacteria and can spread them to wild salmon that are migrating by. And in some situations, it's been shown that they can drive their populations toward extinction. So why isn't anything happening? I think the problem, after reading thousands of pages of federal documents accessed through ATIPs, is that we have a captured agency. We have some rotten apples within DFO, particularly in the aquaculture management division. And they're driving this transition. They're coming up with a plan, which is essentially a greenwash plan to maintain the status quo of this industry. So we need leadership. We need the Prime Minister to step up and keep his word and keep his promise and remove open net salmon farms from BC by 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Dr. Killian Steffes. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
That's okay.
Impersonating Dr.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not a doctor, but I played one on television. No, it's not true. Thanks, everybody, for coming here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're here on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. So today we've heard from scientists, First Nations, people from the fishing industry, and it's just incredible to see the wisdom that's here today telling you the story of the Pacific Coast, and that may be missed in Ottawa. So at the David Suzuki Foundation, we've been working for decades to remove this risk from open net pen aquaculture. We know the risks. It's been documented again for decades, again from the First Nations and scientists telling us the same story over and over again. And DFO knows it, and the Prime Minister knows it, and that's why he made his promise in his mandate letter to remove these. And what has happened in the interim is baffling to everyone standing here in front of you today, and it's baffling to the majority of British Columbians who believed that promise and who want this. We've talked about this isn't just good science, this is good policy. It's what people want and need. And the reason people want that is because it's integral to our communities, it's integral to our economies, and it's vital to our ecosystems. We know that scientifically, we know that intuitively. We also know that open net fish pens are super spreaders for bacteria, for viruses, for parasites like sea lice. No one likes to see the images of sea lice on young salmon, but even worse is their impact, what they're doing to wild salmon. And we were talking earlier today, we put those fish farms in the places that those young salmon like to go. The fish farmers want a place where those currents are going to run through for fresh water. That's where the young salmon want to go. Where they've been taken out, we've seen the results. This group here, we don't often see eye to eye, but the passion and the knowledge here today is telling you this is important. And again, reminding the Prime Minister and his cabinet of the promises that they made for good reason. It wasn't just a random political statement. It is for good reason. It's for the best for everyone here out on the Pacific Coast. So please keep your promise. Now's the time to do it. Please do not waver. Thank you.
A very important point that the industry likes to be located where a strong tidal flush occurs. It must be understood that the salmon do not buck the tide until they head back up the river. So they get delivered directly to where the fish farms are operating. I'd like to introduce Sonia Strobel from the Skipper Auto Community Supported Fishery.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you to the other speakers who've done such an excellent job raising so many important points. And thank you to the Squamish and the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to gather for this important day. My name is Sonia Strobel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Skipper Auto Community Supported Fishery. Our network of over 40 BC fishing families and some 8,000 member home cooks across Canada depend on wild salmon for our way of life, our good living wage jobs, and for our local food system. Long before open pen salmon farms, community-based fisheries and shoreside workers thrived on wild capture fisheries and the myriad shoreside businesses that supported them. Since salmon farms were brought into our waters, we've seen a steady decline in wild salmon numbers, as we've been talking about here. And this has happened everywhere in the world where open pen salmon farms exist. And yes, there are many factors that are contributing to the decline of wild salmon, but we know that the pathogens that are released by salmon farms are not helping. Yes, salmon farms create jobs, but not nearly as many as thriving wild salmon populations create. As you've heard from Kyle Lewis at the UFAWU, thousands of jobs depend on the wild salmon, thousands of good-paying jobs in coastal communities that preserve a way of life depend on wild salmon populations. So on behalf of our fishing families and our member home cooks, we expect you, Justin Trudeau, to keep the promise that you made to us in 2019 to get the salmon farm industry out of our oceans by 2025. He has never backed off that promise, but now that the deadline is less than a year away, we expect clarity and action. Going back on that promise now is an affront to everyday Canadians and their food system, to the more than thousands of workers whose good jobs depend on wild salmon, to BC's ecosystems, and to the wild salmon themselves who have inherent value. So please, I ask you, if you're here today and anyone who's listening to this, to sign our House of Commons petition that was published this morning, asking the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard, Diane Laboutier, to keep her government's promise to end open pen salmon farming by 2025. Thank you.
Is Tasha Sutcliffe here from EcoTrust Canada? Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
There's been edits to the list.
Yeah, okay. My name's Janine Sutherland. I'm the Executive Director with the Wilderness Tourism Association. It's an honor to stand in solidarity with these folks today to be a voice for wild salmon. I'm here to tell you about the wild salmon economy and the many hardworking Canadians whose livelihoods depend upon healthy, intact ecosystems. Tourism is a key segment of the wild salmon economy, and tourism businesses mean serious business. Let me tell you about some numbers that were just released by BC Stats. In 2022, tourism provided nearly 155,000 jobs. Tourism is now BC's biggest contributor to GDP in our province. The figure is 7.2 billion. We have surpassed mining and forestry and agriculture. And most BC tourism businesses are Canadian-owned businesses. Our tourism industry is built upon the supernatural British Columbia brand. We market our tourism assets to the world. And the most valued Canadian tourism asset is our wilderness. Wild salmon, as a keystone species, is essential to the health of our forests and our seas. If salmon stocks were to be wiped out, so too would BC's wilderness and wildlife as we know it. You see these gorgeous forests up here in North Vancouver? Without salmon, those forests would perish. Wild salmon already face so much adversity due to the impacts of climate change. However, we have the power to remove a major threat by investing in the transition to responsible aquaculture. I urge the Canadian government to follow through on their promise. It is simply common sense.
It's certainly worth noting there is no tourism to go visit fish farms.
No problem. Hi, I'm Paul Kershaw. I represent Area D and E gillnets. This is mostly a small boat fleet. You may see them from time to time, but not lately on the Fraser River. It's basically all ma and pa fishing families that operate these vessels, and we feel over the years we've arranged the words maybe 1,000 different ways that we believe fish farming is having a real negative impact on our salmon populations, and we get the same generic response that most of you probably all get. And we feel that the ministry that came out with this promise to remove fish farms in the year of 25, we felt it was hope on a rope though. I don't feel confident the ministry is going to keep its word. And I'm hoping that they do keep their promise to remove them. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to cite how sea lice and pathogens and everything else is killing our wild salmon. I will tell you that there's still abundances of salmon in the world. The Pacific Ocean is a fantastic place for salmon right now. Alaska, over 200 million regularly salmon is harvested. Even Russia is out fishing Alaska in the 200 million category. Japan, of all places, gets anywhere from 10 to 30 million salmon, more than Canada. Canada used to be a leader in salmon production before the farms came in. We now fish in Port Alberni. There was farms in Port Alberni for years, about 2 decades ago. They removed them, the fish came back. They were trying to reestablish them, and my wife and I and the indigenous people there, the Cheyashut, the Uchakalsik, and the Hapakasith, band together with the citizens and sports fishermen and environmentalists, and we had many town meetings where we managed to convince the DFO who was going to put these farms in to actually retract it and say, no, we're not, Port Alberni might not be a good place, mostly due to the fact that they all got together like a group like this, and they stuck together, and they had one common cause: let's get rid of the farms and keep the salmon. Well, it's amazing. That is really my only consistent fishery for my family. the people I represent, every year it beats the prediction. 2 years ago, someone mentioned there was 290,000 sockeye swim up the mighty Fraser. The Somas is a ditch compared to the Fraser. In that year, we had 800,000 fish. We beat the Fraser River. That should be an impossibility. This year, they're predicting 500 and something thousand on the Fraser. That's a disgrace. But this place where there's no fish farms, small river, 800,000 is a potential prediction. And it'll probably beat that because it does every year. The other place that we fish regularly is the Skeena. Like the last 2 years. 2 years ago, it was like a 4 million run. Bigger than the Fraser by 4 times. The Fraser was never behind the Skeena. And now, no fish farms there, and we've got fish there. You know, I think it's clear. Even that year 2 years ago, the Columbia River, 9 dams on the Columbia River, and they have 600,000 sockeye, a record of 100 years. What do they don't have? They don't have fish farms. I'm begging the minister, we can't write any more letters. Keep your promises. We rely on it. Our families, our friends. Thank you.
The Prime Minister of this country, Justin Trudeau, in his mandate letters called for a responsible transition plan. It is not unreasonable to think that that would include the primary role of DFO to look after the environment and wild salmon. We have an unprecedented presence of unity across British Columbia, including over 120 First Nations, commercial fishermen, sport fishermen, wilderness tourism operators, NGOs, other industries that rely upon healthy and abundant wild salmon. And the vast majority of British Columbians support the transition of these fish farms from BC oceans. Prime Minister Trudeau, we implore you to keep your promise to ensure DFO looks after its primary responsibility, not the bank accounts of multinational corporations that are infesting our waters and killing a way of life for First Nations and British Columbians.